Hello chess friends and welcome to that of chess channel and welcome to the computer Blitz chess championship in 2021. This is a super event that's played by top engines in 5+5 time format, so it means the engines have 5 minutes on the clock plus 5 seconds increment per move. And so far Stockfish is in the lead of the super event. Stockfish has a comfortable 8-point lead in front of Lila C0, so Lila C0 is on the second place and the Dragon engine is always on the third place, but we have seen many times the same outcome. Stockfish is winning the tournament, Lila C0 is on the second place, and the Dragon engine is sort of the third, fourth, is finishing many times simply on the third place. So what's the cool part about this tournament? In my opinion, this is a great tournament as many games are played in really good and healthy openings. We have seen many times in this computer chess events that the prearranged lines are bad for one side, or white has to play maybe a bad opening, or black has to play a bad opening. So in my opinion, this is a cool tournament because the engines are playing healthier openings. They're playing many times the Rui Lopez, the Italian game, and you witness now really cool game in a Grünfeld defense. In my opinion, the Grünfeld defense is perfectly fine. You can play normal setups. The prearranged lines, I think, are not so bad for one side. So in my opinion, this is a cool game. If you want to study the Grünfeld defense, this is a perfect game from white's and from black's perspective. So let's check out now the game. Here Stockfish played with the white pieces, Ether with the black pieces, and we have of course now the move d4, knight to f6, we have c4, g6, knight to f3, bishop to g7, and after knight to c3 we have now the last prearranged move, which is of course the move d5, and we have now the Grünfeld defense on the board. So here c takes d5, so this is down the main line, and let's stop and evaluate the strategy immediately after knight to d5, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3. So this is a position that has been reached millions and millions of times in the Grünfeld defense. If we watch now the pawn structure, it's obvious that white has a dominant position in the center, so the main strategy of the Grünfeld defense is of course to break white's central control with moves at c5, then challenging further the position with the move knight to c6. Even bishop to g4 is an opportunity because the knight would be then pinned, and it's also controlling the d4 square. So that's the main strategy for black, I think, to simply battle around the square d4. What white needs to do as a main strategy is get something out of this central control with this pawn. So it means now we could get some spaces with the d5 or e5. So our main strategy is to get simply space on the fifth rank, getting our pawn somewhere there, and have of course then a comfortable game, because if you get some spaces, then your pieces are playing much more freely. They have many spaces then to occupy in the continuation of the game. So these are the main strategies of the Grünfeld defense. Here in the continuation you see now immediately the move c5. If you take d takes c5, then you get this annoying bishop to c3. So here rook to b1. This position has been played also many times. There are now ideas like c takes d4, c takes d4, and then maybe with queen to a5, bishop to d2. Black could maybe gain a pawn here with queen takes a2, but again the queen gets many times exposed here. Although black has here two extra pawns on the queen side, of course white still has this dominant position in the center. This position has been also reached many times, but in my opinion the queen gets endangered, and meanwhile white is doing something, because now with bishop to d3, bishop to e2, or queen to e2, then afterwards castling, I think the queen gets more and more endangered. Then we can also maybe use this rook on the c file. So as I said, white I think is faster simply in development, is down a pawn, but as I said, in my opinion the queen still needs to play maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 tempi just in order to get into security. So as I said, this is a risky line that you could try maybe as black if you like to play the game like this, but as I said, it's a tricky opening. In here my Stockfish 14 engine at home shows already +1 position here for white. So here after move rook to b1, Ethereum didn't go into this line, played simply castling. We have now bishop to e2, and now comes again this idea knight to c6. As we said, simply a battle around the square d4. Here comes now already a tricky part, a tricky opening line that was played by Stockfish. We have now the move d5. d5 is very tricky because you may think that bishop to c3 brings you something, but actually it would be a positional mistake, because here after bishop to d2, bishop takes d2, here queen to d2, now you have to make a decision with the knight, and you see now the knight doesn't have good squares. If you try knight to d4 again, we'll simply take knight takes d4, c takes d4, queen to d4, and again white is continuing the game simply with this central control. The problem is now, even if you don't play knight to d4, if you play knight to a5, the problem is this one, you get h4, and that's actually sometimes the main issue of the Grünfeld defense, because after the trades of knights, in the beginning, if you remember, knight takes d5, and this move, when we got to when we challenge the knight takes c3 and b takes c3, you see you don't have anymore the knight on f6, and the knight on f6 is not controlling anymore the h5 square. Now h4 h5 is very risky, because then the queen could sneak in here on h6, and the white could also deliver a checkmate on the h5. If you try to stop white's progress with move h5, it's again not so good. You get queen to h6, and you don't have good counterplay. Knight to g5 will happen, and then you're going to get probably checkmated on h7. So this is really already tricky. So that was our analysis after potential bishop takes c3, bishop takes bishop to d2, and again, if you try even bishop to g7, again you see the knight is hanging, so you don't have time to do that. As I said, the best way is probably simply to take bishop to d2, queen to d2, and then after knight to f5, here it's already a risky position. Although this position has been played also many times, f6 would be the correct move, but I simply don't like here anymore black's position because of this potential h5 breakthrough. So in my opinion, white is much better. So after move d5, you see Ethereal simply doesn't take the pawn on c3, plays now knight to e5. We have knight takes e5, bishop to e5, and now queen to d2. We have e6, so of course Ethereal is trying to break the main space advantage. We have said in the beginning that white main strategy was simply to get some kind of an advantage when it comes to spaces. So after move e6, white gets challenged immediately. We have now f4, bishop to c7, and now castling finally by Stockfish. So we have now e takes d5, bishop to a5, attacking the c3 weakness. But now a very interesting move, d6, and I see now also many games in the database in this particular line. For instance, we have here a game 11 Aronin against Maxim Vachilagrav. We have Ivan Cheparinov against Alexander Arashchenko. So Cheparinov won the game here with the white pieces. Here the game Aronin against Maxim Vachilagrav ended in a draw. So you see, white is simply relying now on this pass pawn on the d file, and this pass pawn is really annoying, because in one particular moment it could be challenged with bishop to b5, and then maybe even d7 would be a nice positional threat. So that's why here in the continuation we have rook to b8 by Ethereal. Ethereal wants now to play much more freely with this bishop. The bishop needs to get somewhere, maybe to e6 or maybe to f5, in order to break also a little bit the further progress of white, because white wants to play now a very tricky move, f5. f5 would be very annoying for black to handle. Then f6 could happen, and then queen to h6, and then queen to g7. Even if after f5 you play something like bishop to f5, rook to f5, and again the king gets a little bit naked, because the bishop is simply too far away here from the action. The bishop cannot defend anymore the dark squares on the board. So again, I think by sneaking in with the queen to h6, again black could face many tactical problems. So first rook to b8 in order to play somehow freely with the bishop, because if you don't play that, of course, then the b7 pawn is hanging. So here after move rook to b8, we have now rook to b5. Very interesting rook lift here by Stockfish 14. We have now bishop to d7, and now f5. Really sick stuff, because there are now several choices. If you play here bishop to f5, then of course you get rook to f5. As I said, g takes f5, then we can take even this one. We have now rook to a5 as a possibility. If you play queen to a5, then you get checkmated. Here queen to f6, then bishop to h6, and you can only maybe prolong the game by playing here queen takes c3. So that's why after move f5 we have bishop takes b5, we have bishop to b5, and now queen to h4. If you try a6, maybe to kick away this bishop, because you don't want to tolerate, of course, the bishop here, then of course you get a tricky move f6. As we said, that's the main tactical goal. Even if you try bishop to c3, maybe to deflect the queen somewhere here from this h6 square, we can simply take. If you take, then again queen to d2, you see this pawn is holding the whole position here for white. Even if you try here something like, I don't know, king to h8 to escape, queen to h6, then you get rook to g8. That's a necessary move in order to protect everything. Now you get rook to f3. You see we're playing a rook lift. Rook to h3 is now the serious threat. You have to play something like queen to c8, and now after rook to h3 you have to sacrifice simply the queen for a rook, because the checkmate was simply unpreventable. So even if you try something else, let's see, if you, I don't know, maybe something like queen to e8, then you get this beautiful checkmate with queen sacrifice, queen takes h7, king to h7, and then rook to h3. This pawn is cutting off here the g7 square for the king. The king cannot escape on that square, so it would be also a beautiful checkmate. So as I said, after move bishop to b5, you don't have time to play the move a6. That's the main issue, because f6 is really serious threat. So after move bishop to b5, here in the continuation, theory realized that it could have problems here on dark square, so that's why here theory included simply the queen into the defense. So here after move queen to h4, we have rook to f4, kicking away further the queen. We have queen to h5, rook to f3, with ideas again to play rook to h3. You can really never really take this pawn, as I mentioned a couple moves ago. This idea is simply not working. You get this rook to g3, rook to h3 ideas. The queen would sneak in, bishop to d3 will happen. We can attack this one, so simply too many tactical possibilities here for white. So after move rook to f3, we have queen to h4, we have now d7. Look at this annoying pawn. The pawn gets further and further. We have now a6, bishop to f1. We have bishop to c7, attacking here the h2 pawn, so that's why g3 was necessary. We have queen to f6, and now this queen sneaks in. We have b5, we have bishop to h3, queen to g7. Here it hopes for simplification, and Stockfish accepts the challenge, which was, I think, a great choice. We have now queen to g7, king to g7, and now f6. You see, the whole king side is now paralyzed. The king is simply out of game. That's now also the main issue, because after move king to g7, here bishop to h6, played by Stockfish, great move. The rook has to now move to d8, and the cool part is that this pawn is protected, and this pawn is really annoying to handle. The rooks are simply out of game, and here comes actually, I think, now the great positional understanding of Stockfish. Stockfish plays first the move rook to e3. This move is very annoying because you can never relieve the defense with this rook of the 8th rank, because then you get something like rook to e8. First of all, so as I said, this move is very important. So after move rook to e3 and the move a5, now again Stockfish realized that theory has, of course, here this 3 versus 2 pawn majority, so that's why Stockfish has to play now defensive moves with the king. So Stockfish maneuvers the king to f2. This was, I think, also a very cool part of the game. King to f2. Now the king has to go towards the queen side in order to stop also black's progress. So this bishop and the pawn are holding, and the whole position here on the king side, as we said, the pawn on f6 is also very annoying. The rook on e3 is holding now the 3rd rank. The only piece sort of that needs improvement is, of course, the king, and we should not always consider our king as a piece that has to always to be defended. In this particular case, the king is used as an active piece, which was, I think, a cool part of this game. After move rook to king to f2, we have b4. Now you see Stockfish is marching here. Simply c takes b4. We have a takes b4, and now king to d2. We have now b3, a takes b3, c takes b3, and now finally king to c1. Imagine this position if the Stockfish would not have played with the king. Now the king would be simply too far away from the action. Now with the move king to c1, Stockfish has solved, I think, all of the positional problems. We have now rook to e4, king, bishop to c7, and now finally king to b1, bishop to d6, and now rook to e2, stopping, of course, also the potential progress with the move b2. So here in the continuation, bishop to c7, rook to e7, bishop to d6, rook to e2. We have now bishop to g4. Here Stockfish is trying to improve the position of the bishop. Bishop to d6, bishop to d2, and now bishop to c7. We have now again rook to e7, h6. Here Ethereum is trying to create some breathing spaces for the king. We have now bishop to e2, bishop to b6, bishop to c4, and you see now these pieces are glued together. Everything is pretty much tactically prepared for the sacrifice, for the attack on around the square f7. So here we have bishop to d4, bishop to f4, attacking the rook. We have now bishop to f7, king to h8, and now finally bishop to b3. Here we have bishop to f6, not a problem, a counter attack by Stockfish. We have g5, bishop to d6, now a check, not a problem. And here Stockfish simply grabbed the bishop on f6. Ethereum finally takes this annoying pawn. You see this pawn was very annoying through the whole game. It was really something that bothered, I think, black in many moves. Now after move rook to d7, we have now rook to h6, and Stockfish has, I think, here a completely winning endgame. Although this could be playable, but the problem is if Stockfish would not have taken this pawn on h6, maybe this could be a draw, because it's very hard to attack for white this position with the 2 bishops against 1 rook. But now when the pawn is taking, we should always notice that white can always create a pass pawn by playing h4 and similar stuff. White will always create the pass pawn, so that's why so far it's obviously a completely winning endgame here for Stockfish. So after move king to g7, we have rook to e6, we have king to h7. Now Stockfish plays a couple moves. Here we have now bishop to c2, attacking the rook, rook to h6, bishop to h6, and here after rook to a2, we have king to c3, again a new check. Here rook to a2, not a problem, because if you try something like rook to h2, probably this is even the best move for black, because it leads now into a complicated game. Bishop to f4, pardon me, not rook to h6. Here maybe something like this. Still, white can always take out this pawn, and okay, maybe in human level this could be protectable in one particular way. What black would have to do here, I think, is to give up simply the rook for a bishop and a pawn somehow. I'm not sure how, but that would be actually the main strategy to make a draw here. So giving up the rook for a pawn and a bishop, and then of course white is left simply with a bishop here, so that could be a draw. But actually, even in this position, the evaluation is +3 here for white. So as I said, I think that the top engine like Stockfish will of course find a way to win this endgame. So this would be the continuation after move rook to h2, but in the continuation after move bishop to f5, here Ethereum tried rook to a5. We have king to e4, protecting everything. Now Stockfish simply maneuvers the king and is trying now of course to take out somehow this pawn. Finally bishop to g4, rook to a4, now bishop to e6 again, and finally simply pushing the pawn. We have now g5, g6, the pawn is marching on. We have check here. You cannot play rook to g5, of course. Very cool idea here by Stockfish. We have king to g4, and now a promotion here Stockfish took, and has now of course here the opportunity to deliver checkmate, and did here in move 84. It was checkmate with the move queen to d2. So really brilliant stuff. I think this was a very cool game because of this tactic. Let's go back. Because of this early sacrifice. So here after move bishop to d7, Stockfish found this move f5, sacrifice the rook for the exchange, bishop to b5. Here bishop to b5, we have seen that a6 is not working because of this tactic f6. F6 was the main issue. So after move queen to h6 here, queen to h4, the queen get challenged with rook to f4, queen to h5, rook to f3. This was still a tricky position you have seen, but this was a powerful pawn here on d7. Stockfish found great ways how to activate the pieces, and I liked also the king march in the end, king to f2, king to e1, just in order to stop also black's progress on the queen side, because Ethereum found great counterattacks with this 3 versus 2 pawn majority on the queen side. So I think we have seen beautiful elements here in this chess game. I really enjoyed the game. As I would like to play the Grünfeld event myself, I would like to cover it also further on my YouTube chess channel. If you want to study some more attractive games like this, check out my commented chess games played by computer series with some more games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, and many more. And if you want to see humans battling it out in their best chess games, check out my commented chess games, the best chess games of all time series, with some great games played by Garry Kasparov, Mikhail Tal, Anatoly Karpov, Magnus Carlsen, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.